How's it going everyone, and welcome back to a brand new video, and today we're going to be ranking Star Wars movies from the worst to the best. As The Rise of Skywalker has just come out and completed the Skywalker saga. So I felt like this was a good time to rank Star Wars movies on the channel, as I've had heaps of requests for it over the past few years, and I've seen The Rise of Skywalker twice now, and I think I'm done processing it. So I feel like I'm ready to put it in place in my Star Wars rankings. Now, if you haven't seen The Rise of Skywalker, don't worry, there will be no spoilers in this video. Now, we're obviously not going to include the holiday special or the weird Ewok movies from the 80s or the Clone Wars movie, just the actual 11 Star Wars films. So before we dive into it, this list is just my personal opinion, and I can guarantee right now that most people will completely disagree, and that's okay. Just know I love every single movie on this list, and I mean, it's Star Wars. Just go ahead and let me know your rankings in the comments below. But let's keep it civil down there, this is just for fun after all, and it's just my opinion, so don't take it to heart. So kickstarting off this list at the number 11 spot is Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. Now like I said, I love this movie, even though it's in last place. This is just the Star Wars movie that I often find a bit of a grind to get through at times. One of the things that constantly pulls me out of this movie is Obi-Wan and his fake beard, and you can tell because the reshoots are just so obvious. It absolutely cracks me up, and I actually low-key love it in some weird way. But I think Attack of the Clones just misses the mark and isn't really the finest of what the Star Wars prequels have to offer. The Anakin and Padme romance is meme royalty, and a lot of the CGI just doesn't work. But there are a lot of saving graces in this movie. It actually has one of my favourite and most powerful scenes in the Skywalker saga. That is of course the death of Shmi Skywalker. This scene is so well acted and so pivotal to Anakin's arc, and I'm not gonna lie, this scene alone makes me really love this movie. Attack of the Clones has a ton of flaws, but you know, we got to see some cool stuff here, and it does save the film for me. You know, like we got to see Yoda in a lightsaber fight for the first time, and it's essential in beginning the Clone Wars, which is just about my favourite time in the Star Wars timeline. So Attack of the Clones, I love it, but it is flawed. But now onto the number 10 spot is The Phantom Menace. So The Phantom Menace for me, it misses a few beats, especially early on in the film. The CGI is very janky in some parts, and Jake Lloyd wasn't overly great as Little Annie, but I do think that the abuse he received was just unfair and not cool. Now, I often contemplate between The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones as my least favourite Star Wars movie, but The Phantom Menace normally triumphs for one reason and one reason only, and that is Darth Maul, one of my favourite Star Wars characters. The lightsaber fight with Darth Maul, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn was easily one of the best lightsaber battles we have seen in Star Wars, despite it not really having any emotional weight behind it. But Duel of the Fates never gets old, and I have so much fun with the third act of this movie, but it just gets bogged down with politics, and I think the tone is set in the opening crawl. Like every time I see the taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute, I'm kind of just like, why did George Lucas think that this was a good idea? But despite the film's flaws, the Darth Maul fight and the pod racing scene make me always happy to watch The Phantom Menace, and I tend to have a really good time with it. But now onto number 9, we have Solo: A Star Wars Story. Now this movie really surprised me. My expectations were extremely low, and I think that's why I actually really like it. It is good to see Solo getting a lot of love among Star Wars fans, as I think despite the movie being good, it was destined to fail, and considering all the issues behind the scenes for this movie, it is pretty amazing that it wasn't a total disaster. Alden Ehrenreich was, fine as Solo. He had the impossible job of impersonating a young Harrison Ford, and he'd done the best he could. And I do like the way that they actually explore Lando and Han's relationship, and in my opinion, it makes Lando's scenes in Empire Strikes Back better, which is what a film like this should do. But the film is obviously not perfect. L3 was just a budget K2SO and just drove me absolutely insane. And I didn't really like how Han got his name. But there is a lot of saving graces in this movie, and Han and Chewie meeting each other, I thought that was handled really well. So overall, I do enjoy Solo. It was a classic example of not going into a movie with high expectations and being pleased as a result. But moving on to the number 8 spot, we have A New Hope, or Star Wars. Now let me get this straight, I love this movie, and I'm not surprised in the slightest that this film at the time became a phenomenon. Some aspects of A New Hope haven't aged that well, The Obi-Wan and Vader fight scene isn't great from a combat perspective, and coming off the back of Revenge of the Sith, it kind of takes me out of the film every time I see it. But the aged choreography of the fight is also half the charm, so I don't like pitting that against the movie. Now, in my opinion, a lot of what came after A New Hope just surpassed it, which is the way it should be. That's totally fine. A New Hope for me is always a great time, and I understand why it's a lot of people's favourite Star Wars movie. It's more than fair enough. I love the story that it tells, seeing old hermit Obi-Wan introduce Luke to the Force, and the introduction of Vader, it was awesome. But for me, I didn't really grow up with it, so I don't have that personal connection to A New Hope, but I still respect and love the film that kickstarted this incredible saga that we all know and love. But now moving on to the number 7 spot, we have Rogue One. So Rogue One I never actually used to like, and only recently in the past year or so, I have found a newfound appreciation for it. As of right now, I think that Rogue One is just a really good movie that helps show us that the Rebellion isn't just this flawless beacon of hope. The Rebels had to do some pretty bad stuff. And that is very well translated through Cassian in this movie. And I also really enjoyed director Orson Krennic as well. And I've got to say, Rogue One is one of the most beautifully shot Star Wars movies to date. Gareth Edwards done some seriously good work behind the camera, and seeing the Death Star rise above Scarif never gets old. And of course, we can't talk about Rogue One without mentioning that Darth Vader hallway scene. In my opinion, one of the best scenes in Star Wars. Between Vader going absolutely nuts and the music, it honestly gives me chills every single time, and it's the first thing that I think of when Rogue One enters my mind. But now onto the number 6 spot, we have Return of the Jedi. Now, this was my least favourite original trilogy movie when I was younger, as I was just never able to buy into the fact that Ewoks were a pivotal part in taking down the biggest tyrant in the galaxy. I do still have a small problem with that to this day, but you know, I can put it aside. Because I love the finale of this movie with Luke, Vader, and the Emperor. It is Star Wars pretty much at its peak, but I personally have always found Return of the Jedi a very patchy movie. I love and adore some parts of it, and some parts I kind of just want to skip. But nevertheless, Return of the Jedi is always an amazing and enjoyable watch. I love everything to do with Luke and Vader in this movie, and this is of course the first time we really got to see the Emperor properly. And he absolutely steals the show. The movie does start well with the entire sequence on Tatooine going to rescue Han, but then for me it lumps a little bit, then gets really good towards the third act. So for me, Return of the Jedi is amazing, and I always look forward to it after I've finished watching Empire Strikes Back. So moving on now to the number 5 spot is The Force Awakens. Now, my only flaw with this film is that it played it a little bit too safe, and of course was similar to A New Hope, but I'm not going to beat a dead horse with that, because I can always watch this film with a smile on my face, as it is beautifully shot and really revived a lot of people's love for Star Wars. It pays homage to A New Hope, which is a brilliant movie in its own right, whilst introducing us to these new characters that would take this franchise forward. And The Force Awakens, when it first came out, was pretty much met with universal praise, and it's only since The Last Jedi came out that people have really turned on it. But not me. I still view The Force Awakens the same as when I did at the midnight screening back in 2015. Now, I really love Han Solo in this movie. Like, I loved Han in the originals, but this movie took the character to the next level if you ask me. And his death scene is, in my opinion, one of the more emotional moments in Star Wars, and it was the first scene that brought a tear to my eye in a very long time. And also, I really enjoyed the mystery surrounding Rey's character, and the idea of Finn being this defected stormtrooper and Poe Dameron being this smooth-talking ace pilot. And as for Kylo Ren, he brought the menace in this film and also brought a ton of vulnerability and complexity to the role. I really liked The Force Awakens, and I think The Rise of Skywalker has actually improved it even more. And onto the number 4 spot is The Last Jedi. Now, I know this is going to annoy a lot of people, but like I said before, this list is just my opinion, and I like The Last Jedi because it has balls. And it really did free Star Wars from the noose of predictability. Star Wars could not play it safe forever, and The Last Jedi tried to go off in a brave new direction. Some things worked, some things didn't. Obviously, the film is nowhere near perfect. I absolutely loathe the Canto Bight sequence and Rose Tico as a character, so the people who don't like those things, I'm with ya. But I actually like what they did with Luke in this movie. They didn't do the predictable thing and just have Luke come back as the same person he was in Return of the Jedi and just go and destroy the First Order. They instead showed Luke as this broken man and addressed that expectation head on. The Last Jedi showed us that it's okay to fail and that even our greatest heroes can make mistakes. And in the words of Yoda, the greatest teacher failure is. It adds depth, and I think The Last Jedi made Luke a much better character. Because even a legend like Luke Skywalker can make mistakes. But the redeeming thing about Luke in this movie is he faces those mistakes head on and in the process becomes one of the most powerful Force users ever and dies a heroic death. Luke had to hit rock bottom to ascend to new heights. This, in my opinion, made Luke a brilliant and more dynamic character with a fitting heroic end. I stand by this, and I always will. I think some of the fans just wanted to see the predictable option with Luke, but I absolutely cherish the direction they went with Luke. They added way more complexity to his character and gave him a really, really good heroic death. Now moving on, as for Kylo Ren and the Rey dynamic, I absolutely love it. Kylo and Rey and their connection is one of my favourite aspects of the sequel trilogy. And The Last Jedi is where it really got interesting. The throne room sequence is great, and given what we know now from The Rise of Skywalker, I think it's actually improved a lot of aspects of The Last Jedi. So whilst I do understand why some people might not like The Last Jedi, this film hit me on an emotional level unlike any other Star Wars film had for a very long time. And I will forever love The Last Jedi for that reason. But now coming into the number 3 spot is The Rise of Skywalker. Now, I don't care what the reviews say. Some people say this film is a mess, some people say it's brilliant, so it's divisive. A lot of people are going to agree with the fact that it's this high, but a lot of people are going to just be completely confused. J.J. Abrams even said it himself that not everyone was going to like the movie. We all have different experiences with Star Wars, and my experience has led me to loving this movie. Now, the first time I watched it, I liked it, but I had a lot of thoughts to process and I didn't really love it. So I went and watched it a second time, and I'm really glad that I did. Because I walked out of the cinema ultimately satisfied and still in disbelief with some of the things we got to see. But most importantly, I walked out of the cinema smiling like a little kid. It's really hard to bring full justification as to why I love this film so much without getting into spoilers, which don't worry, I won't. But a good place to start is Kylo Ren's character arc. He is my favourite character in this trilogy by a mile. And I love where his character ended up, and the moments that Kylo Ren and Rey shared in this movie were some of my favourite in the saga. I do feel like The Rise of Skywalker was a hybrid of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, and it's cool to see people who, didn't like The Last Jedi actually really like The Rise of Skywalker. Me personally, I find myself as a really lucky fan because I enjoyed both of them. But I do feel like The Rise of Skywalker sort of took the best elements from The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi and made it into one hell of a conclusion in the process. Granted, I do understand why some people might not like this film. It can be jarring and it does squeeze a lot into its runtime and it should have been longer. But they are about my only gripes with the film. I was pleased with the answers that we've been theorizing over for years, and the epic showdown at the end was grand in scale, but it didn't go over the top stupid like I thought it might. It was an emotional ending that made me feel satisfaction, sadness, and happiness all rolled into one. J.J. Abrams had an impossible job with this film, and the fact that it turned out the way it did was a job well done if you ask me. This film was never going to please everybody. Now, I did also like that the entire crew was together for this movie, so you felt that Star Wars camaraderie from the original trilogy with this new cast. And I've really grown to appreciate just how full on this movie is. The first time I watched it, it was very jarring, but the second time I watched it, I really appreciated its pacing. It doesn't have any downtime, it's all exposition, answers, and action, and in my opinion, it is definitely better on second viewing, like I said, because you've already processed what's happened, and you can just enjoy it a lot more the second time round. Now, the answers we got for Rey, I actually didn't mind, and I actually thought I was really not going to like it if they did go down that path. But I actually thought that Rey's character improved tenfold in this film, and the stuff with Palpatine, whilst it could have been explored maybe a little bit more, it was captivating from start to finish. So for me, The Rise of Skywalker was excellent. It's unlike any other Star Wars film we've ever seen, and it made me feel things that not a lot of movies do, and I have to commend it for that. But taking out the runner-up spot at number 2 is Empire Strikes Back. Now, Empire Strikes Back is a complete masterpiece and is deservingly regarded as the best Star Wars film, and not just the best Star Wars film, but one of the best films of all time. But it's my runner-up, and I'll get into why when we discuss my number 1. Like I said, it's a masterpiece. The only gripe I have with Empire is the space worm sequence. It just feels like a bit of dead time in the movie. It's still cool, and you know, that's just me being really nitpicky. But I love this movie. All of the stuff with Luke and Yoda is just amazing, and I adore Yoda. Empire is also the reason for the introduction of Lando Calrissian, and we all love us some Lando. And of course, I can't talk about Empire Strikes Back without the Luke versus Darth Vader fight and the biggest plot twist reveal of all time, Vader being Luke's father. Now, if that actually spoiled any of you, then I'm seriously worried about you as a human being. Who the hell hasn't seen Empire? But yeah, anyway, I love this movie. It's so well directed and written that you can barely pick it apart, and if you do, you're probably just grasping at straws. It has some of the most iconic dialogue in the saga, and the lightsaber choreography improved massively over A New Hope. I really don't know what else I can say about Empire Strikes Back, man. It's a masterpiece, and it's one of the most iconic movies of all time. So that of course brings us to the number one spot, and that is of course Revenge of the Sith. Now, Revenge of the Sith is the movie that got me into Star Wars, and I am forever in debt to it for that. And that's why it is above Empire Strikes Back. I happily will admit that Empire is a better film, but this was the first Star Wars movie I watched and really felt something that resonated with me. Granted, I was 9 years old and I was just blown away by the lightsaber battles, but most of us have a Star Wars film that is responsible for us coming to the conclusion that we love Star Wars. And Revenge of the Sith is that film for me. It really is great to see so many people openly saying that Revenge of the Sith is one of, if not their favourite Star Wars movie ever. Granted, the film does have some janky dialogue and isn't flawless, but for me, it has two of my favourite sequences from Star Wars. The Order 66, which was arguably one of the most pivotal events in the Skywalker saga, and of course, the final battle between Anakin and Obi-Wan. The reason this final fight carries so much weight is because you buy that these two are like brothers. They fight like brothers and they joke like brothers. And Revenge of the Sith does a really good job early on in the film showcasing this, and it just makes it so much more of a gut punch when we see the inevitable later on in the movie. Now, a lot of people say that the Anakin and Obi-Wan fight was too long or too ridiculous. In my opinion, I think it's just how it should be. This is Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi in their prime. This is a lightsaber duel with a lot of emotional weight. So for me, the fact that it was as long as it was, that's honestly the way it should be. So I love this fight, I adore it, I enjoy every single second of it. Now also, Revenge of the Sith has some of the best of what John Williams has to offer. The music in this movie is amazing, and I often listen to Anakin's Dark Deeds, Anakin's Betrayal, Battle of the Heroes, and the Anakin vs Obi-Wan music over and over again, because it gives me chills every single time. And Ian McDiarmid, Ewan McGregor, and Hayden Christensen, they are great in this movie, and yes, I said Hayden Christensen. I will defend him in this movie until the day I die. But Revenge of the Sith is just my Star Wars movie, and I love it more and more every time I watch it, and it holds a lot of sentimental value to me. So in my opinion, Revenge of the Sith is the best Star Wars movie. But that is of course just my opinion. We all come from different walks of life and have different values that make us experience Star Wars movies differently. So it's okay if you don't agree with this list. Just let me know in the comments below your favourite Star Wars movies. But just let's keep it civil down there. This was just for fun after all. So anyway, this video has been super long, so I'm not going to keep you guys here any longer. So thank you all for watching. Be sure to drop a like if you did enjoy and subscribe to the channel if you are new. And may the Force be with you always.